Hi there. My name is Robin Saluver, and I'm the gallery director here at Lane Community College in Eugene, Oregon. And today we have the pleasure of talking with Sarah Grew, the artist who's created this amazing photographic installation, Ghost Forest. Sarah is currently one of our Jane Stevens King remote artists in residence here at LCC. We're so fortunate to have the patronage of Jane Stevens King in support of our artists. It allows us to host artists and to exhibit their work, to enrich our academic community and our regional communities as well. Sarah Grew creates artwork based in painting and photography, work that can expand into installation, as we see here, and environmental art, or contract into collage and printmaking. Her work is infused with ideas that bridge philosophy, natural science, and art history. Her art explores ideas of time, light, and climate change. Sarah's work is held in private collections nationally and internationally. She's also created a number of public art projects. Sarah has engaged in a number of artist residencies in the US and abroad, on land and on sea. I'm really happy to introduce Sarah Grew here in the Ghost Forest. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to just work in my studio, but have the support of the residency and get to do that. And I'd like to thank everyone here and Jane Stevens King for that, and then all the other people who've helped me with the Ghost Forest, because this type of piece takes a lot of people actually to make it. Even if I'm the brain, the core of it. Right. There's a lot of people involved.
Yeah. So I was thinking that one of us, either you or I, could read your artist statement to give our audience some understanding of what you're doing here, and then we'll walk through the Ghost Forest.
All right. In the fall of 2020, huge wildfires raged on the west coast of the United States. Our sky turned yellow-gray from smoke. It rained ash across the whole country and left us gasping for breath. I mourned the loss of forest lands now blackened with carbon. Carbon, the basic building block of life. Carbon, the remains after a fire. Carbon, a material I use to create art. Carbon print, considered the most archival of all photo printing processes, with an estimated life of 10,000 years. The charred remains of trees become photographs in my mind. After extensive research and experimentation, the forest memories printed on glass to accentuate their fragility hang before you. My process and the resulting prints with their frilled edges and torn emulsion echo the way natural fire cycles can surmount devastation to provide nutrients to the soil, force a pine cone to disperse its seeds, or shape the landscape, in contrast to the extreme intensity and size of fires that are now common. The photographs show us the beauty being lost to human negligence and climate change. In the United States, there has been an average of 70,000 wildfires each year for the past 10 years. 90% of them are human-caused. The Ghost Forest has 70 trees, each photo worth 1,000 fires.
Thank you. I think that gives us, as we begin to walk through the forest, gives us kind of an orientation. What you were thinking and what we're grappling with. And I think to hear that artist statement really increases the emotive quality of the work and really puts us in a particular time and place.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Part of what we see as we start to walk through the forest is, that there are some images that are more pictorial. There are images that are hung at all heights, as we can see, but being in the ghost forest, that's really impactful.
Right, yeah. Well, one of the things that I wanted to play with was this idea of because it's hard to work in a two-dimensional format with something as expansive and three-dimensional as a forest. And so how could I produce something that had some dimensionality to it? And really the thing that I thought of, or the way that I wanted to work with it, was this idea of sort of overlapping and having the trees close enough in places that they would form clusters, like in a forest, clusters where you couldn't walk through, and then have pathways or little stands where maybe you could get into the center.
Well, and then there are these other really beautiful little vignettes, things that we might see on a forest floor, or being right up against
the bark
of an ancient tree. So let's just walk through and...
Okay. I wanted to not have everything be burn imagery, because I felt like how often how many times could you look at a burned forest and get something beautiful from it in a way, or have it be not just feeling like you're being hit over the head. And so early on I realized that I wanted to include images from all stages of the forest and all places in the forest, both there's waterfalls, and there's sort of my ecotourism, where we have people have manipulated trees, and there's burned tree trunks.
These just become so abstract and textural, they almost look like rubbings.
Yeah, they do. They really do. It's true.
In different, this almost feels like ice. We see details, these beautiful fungus, stands after a burn. Really, one of the other things that's really exciting about being in the space is the layering. So being able to see both the outside and the inside, and those moments of pausing, as I know one does when out in the forest. Right,
and I think one thing I like and appreciate about using the glass is that the one side is the shiny side that doesn't have any emulsion on it, and your reflection comes in there. Like right now I'm looking at my own hands in the glass, and so I become part of the image. And then on the other side, that's the emulsion side, my reflection isn't there, and so I see the image really differently because of that.
And there's this other contrast that you've described in terms of reflective or absorbent, but there's this shine, and then here this matte that almost has this opacity to it. So tell us about a couple of, I know this one is really different from the others. And I say that because it has a really specifically oval-shaped frame. So what were you doing with that? How did you decide?
That was a trick. Initially, the very first ones I started printing with space around the edges, the way that one would normally print, think of printing or framing a photograph. And so I framed them with the glass, and then I realized that for me, I wanted them to feel a little bit more like they were just pieces of ash unfurling and landing somewhere. And so then it became something where I'd look at each image and decide how much of the glass is this going to take up, and how much glass do I want around it? And I would have to make notes on the negative or on the edge of the negative or on paper, so that in the darkroom I'd pick the right sheet of glass to use for the piece. And that piece is really fun because it does have that oval, and it was really influenced from looking for, there's 4 photos I didn't take in the show, and that are from the 19th century or early 20th century. And one of them is round, it's over here, and it's a photo by Carleton Watkins. And so when I was looking at these old photos from the 19th century, there was this whole album by Carleton Watkins of round photos, and I remembered looking at a bunch of other framed daguerreotypes and things where they're framed in that round feel, and that portrait of, daguerreotype portrait box.
Well, it's this
little
really
clamshell.
Victorian.
And so, and very Victorian thing. And that image just really, when I just thought, that one, that would do, that's perfect for that. And so I decided to print that one that way. But in part also because I wanted to have the two in balance and in conversation with each other, because they're the only two that are rounded in any way specifically. And I thought that would be kind of an interesting conversation, because this one's also a portrait of a tree, and it's a tree that no longer lives, but it was known as the mother tree in Calaveras County, and it was a giant redwood that even before Carleton Watkins took the photo of it, they had stripped all the bark up to 100 feet up and sent the bark off to be in a World Fair, and then of course that killed the tree. And so so there was this interesting sort of history to the story of the tree and of the photograph being that the mother tree. And lately there's been a lot of there's a book that just came out called The Mother Tree, Searching for the Mother Tree, and things like that. And so this idea of a mother tree that sends its nutrients underground to its offspring trees around it, and is something that we've discovered is true. And so here's this mother tree that's been cut off that way, and then all these burned treetops in the forest. And I thought it was kind of an interesting play.
Well, we hadn't talked about this before, but that metaphor, the really despairing metaphor of stripping the mother tree and killing this tree that is the caregiver is. There are all kinds of metaphors in there about.
Yes, and the fire doing that same sort of thing, yeah. And fire isn't only destructive for forests, and that's one of the things people always try to say as a way to minimize the impact of climate change in these situations. And yes, it's true, there have always been fires that have been set by lightning, but if you think about the fact that 90% of the fires now are by humans, the amount of fire by lightning is minimal. And there's the fact that the fires used to be small and be able to be put out both just naturally through rain, and also through having old trees like that were resistant to fire. And now where they've clear cut, all the trees are now replanted in the same age, and those are the ones that are the most likely to go up in a real conflagration. And the temperatures get so hot in the new fires that we're having now that they create their own weather patterns, and things like that. And so one of the more subtle pieces that I want to bring in, I don't want to hit people over the head with those facts, and so one of the more subtle pieces I want to bring in is this thought about the forest and how special it is, and how we have to be the guardians of it. And we can't guard it like that.
Right.
And we can't guard it like that.
Right.
But we can be the guardian. We have to change our
Right.
ways and be more guardians of the forest.
Well, I think that, part of what you're talking about with that is this idea of monocropping.
Yeah,
And it makes it easier and more efficient for industry. And we are very dependent on industry. But part of what you do here is you show us the culture, the mixed culture
Yeah.
of the forest.
right,
And
right.
again, we see these discoveries. With this tree here, we see all the way from the ground, the base, up to the crown of the tree. And I think you've done that so beautifully here to show us both the treasures and the beauty, but also the ecological culture
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
necessary for the health of a forest.
Right, right, and one of those things is fire, and this one that we
Right.
were looking at here is got alderbark and fireweed, and fireweed is one of the first flowers that blooms after a fire, and I purposely, there's actually 2 fireweeds, I don't know where the other one is right now, but I wanted to include fireweed because it does bloom only after a fire, and it lives for 3 or 4 years. And it's this brilliant magenta flower. It's really pretty, and sort of loose, blows in the wind a little.
Yeah.
And so it's just nice. It's not all about. I didn't want the piece to be all about devastation from fire, but also about rebirth from fire, because that
Right.
is certainly a piece of it. And yeah.
So tell us a little bit, you referred to a piece like this, for example, or one like this that might be easier for Randy to capture with those edges that have this sense of ash in the sky, which, after that summer of 2020, and for so many people all over the country, but those of us on the West Coast, that there was a lot of that.
Right.
So
Right.
it's traumatic, but there is something that is kind of almost ethereal about it as well. And so then we go back to the carbon and your process, both the photographic technique and the materials you're using.
Right.
So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I go and I collect the most nicely crisp, blackest, most burned little pieces of wood. It doesn't take very much. And I go and collect it from various forest fires. I've been to getting close to 20. And I've also had a few people send me soot, send me burned material from places where I wouldn't be able to go. And I grind it up. First I dry it again in the oven and make sure it's really dry. I just dry it on a low oven for several hours and make sure it's really nice and dry, and because it tends to absorb some moisture just from the air. And then I put it in a coffee grinder and I grind it up. And then I take a muller, which is like a artist muller, which is similar to a mortar and pestle, and I grind it again, and I hand grind it, and as I hand grind it, then I pour in just a little bit of distilled water and make it into a real paste. And so I have this one process where I'll spend an hour just grinding with the hand grinder. You need music. And then I cook it in more water, and then I strain it, and I keep that water. I don't throw that water away, because that water often, there's some of it is really colored, kind of a yellow brown, and you can use it for drawing. It makes a kind of ink. And then at that stage, I then, from that liquid, I then need to make that into a more permanent ink. And I do that by adding binders and adding a few other minor ingredients. And then I have a pot full of gelatin that I'm also warming up and getting ready. And I mix those two things together, and then at the end I mix the soot that I've already boiled for a few hours into that mixture.
And the boiling of that soot is just to reduce it to...
It's yeah, to try
And
and
to
soften
clarify
it, and it's also to get the color out of it. I've been working on one of the things that's hard for me is that I want to make the color a little stronger, and you might be able to tell in here in this light, but the color of the photographs is really dependent on my soot source.
So I'm looking at this one, and that one really has some yellow in it.
Yes, and that's from the soot, and and this one, it's very different. It's kind of different from this one. This one I know is Doug fir, and I know that this one's from the Holiday Farm fire. This one, I'd have to look on my notes to see what fire it came from, and to know whether I knew my wood source.
Is that's an image of Joshua Tree?
That's right, and that is and Joshua Tree is a forest. We don't think of it as a forest, but it is a type of forest.
Right.
And there was a huge fire in Joshua Tree that summer, 2020, or the summer of 2021. And that's one of the fires I haven't been to, but that somebody sent me some soot from the other day was a Joshua Tree fire.
One of the other things I'm seeing here, I mean, there's so much chemistry here.
I know, I love cooking with my art materials.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of ink making and natural dyeing, and so that the use of carbon and the layers of color in carbon. But the other thing that I'm seeing here is this crystallization of, is it the chemical reaction of the gelatin and the carbon?
Yeah, and also in that case, it's also that there's some air bubbles that got trapped.
Okay.
And so you get those air bubbles as well. But one of the things that carbon printing is known for is having texture. And one of the things, and when you see a piece in relief, on the emulsion side, and I'm trying to find, this one's a nice one. It might be a little hard. We'll move over here.
What about this one?
Yeah, this one, if you move over here and you look at it from an angle, you can see that actually where the whites are, all you're seeing is the clear glass, and there's actually a raised texture and a surface that's like this going in light and dark. And that's one of the things that's the mark of a carbon print. And carbon prints are really interesting because they were invented in 1855, and until sort of the 1950s, they were considered the archival print. And museum prints, before the 20th century, if you wanted a museum print, it was a carbon print. And they can be very tricky and very exacting. They're really beautiful. They're more beautiful, actually, I think, in some ways on paper than on glass. But in this, it was a popular thing in the 1920s to print them on glass, and that was one of the reasons I thought it would be interesting, knowing that, using the lantern print. This one, actually, you can see, I just saw a bunch of texture on that one.
And this one above your head here, where it really looks like dappled light. That one's so nice because there is this dappled light in the image itself, but then because of the imperfections of the technique, and you capturing, like really building on or allowing those imperfections. And so then after I get my emulsion all made, the next stage is I pour it onto a sheet of really thin paper that we call it carbon tissue, but it's not related at all to the carbon tissue one used to use in the office in the old days, except that it does have carbon on it. But so I pour out my emulsion onto these little carbon sheets, and then those have to dry, and that can take, in this environment, it can take 2 days to dry. And then once those are dry, I take them to the dark room, and then I sensitize them with chemicals, and then I have to mate them with a negative. And carbon printing, like many of the other early printing processes,
is an ultraviolet light printing process. And so you have to have your negative be the same size as your final print. And and it's one of the reasons I can do this now with digital printing, but could never have done it in the old, 20 years ago. I wouldn't have been able to do it, because with digital printing, I can make a negative any size I want, and I can resize my negative. And one of the ways that I've streamlined my process is that I can adjust my negative on the computer and then print it. Whereas in the old days, you would have had your negative that you'd made, and you had to adjust everything else based on that negative, and it was the given.
Right,
Whereas
unless in the past, unless it had been a large format camera with a large format negative, you would have ended up with all these, like,
yeah, I would have ended up
you
with
could
a
have
lot
done
of 35
70,000,
yeah, exactly.
one for each tree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so then you made it underwater and flip it over, and finally in the development process, you peel off that piece of paper, that thin paper, and get rid of that thin paper as one of the final steps in the development process. And so then you're left with, in my case, a sheet of glass in the low light room that's in a bath of water, and the whole thing is turned black, and you can't see anything, and you think there's no way.
Well,
there's just no way.
Again, there's this experiential. I've fortunately never been in the midst of a forest fire.
Yeah.
But that could be, some remnant of that experience.
Oh yeah, right. I suppose so. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you're going to drop some video or still images of that process into this talk.
Right.
So folks will be able to see that a little bit more.
Yeah, right, right. Because it's hard to understand it. It's a sort of mind-bending, the way that it. It's like, what? You do what? You transfer it from one thing to another thing?
Yeah.
And how does it all not fall apart? Well, it does sometimes fall apart. And the emulsion doesn't really like to stick to glass. And so that's one of the other pieces, is just, I have one shot of getting it to work. And if it doesn't work, I totally end up with tears.
Right.
And I have to know that.
I think that's a beautiful segue into this idea that you've embraced of this being a work in progress. We could call it Ghost Forest 1.
Yeah, right. I know.
Unless you want to leave the number off.
Yeah.
But let's walk back through and just talk a little bit about what that means for you with Ghost Forest specifically in this research, but also as an artist, embracing being in the middle of something and it having a public platform or viewing.
Right. Well, I think in terms of that last point, one of the things about this piece is that because of its sort of monumental scale, I've really wanted to have other people's input, and it's so big that I could never hang it in my studio. I had no idea how it was going to look, and so it was really scary to feel like, oh, here, I'm going to put up my work, only I don't know how it's going to look. Yeah, that could be great, or it could be horrible.
So there, just anyone who has done installation work before is aware that there are all kinds of levels and layers of exploration of the work. And one of the things that, I had the privilege of being on the team to install this work. And I loved the other day when we were in the Ghost Forest, after everything was cleaned up from the labor of installing, you just had this, it was almost this joyous, this buoyancy of, oh, this is what it can look like.
Yeah.
Because there's this cleanliness, and there are all these really special details. The wire that just sometimes kisses the floor, sometimes doesn't, but some things that happen are these kind of generic tree forms, those trunk forms, and then shadows.
Right, I love some of the shadows we've got on the floor, and I know that was something that you and I were really trying to work on and work with, was to get the lighting and to come in ways that it would accentuate
Well, and
those
it really
shadows.
begins to build the duff and debris of the forest floor, that history.
Yeah, and that was there were so many little challenges, and that's in terms of like, well, what do I do with the floor? How do we handle that? How do we make sure that it's a piece that allows people to walk through without, having it be too close or too far, and yet gives, like right here, I don't remember which team it was that actually hung this little part, but I was letting people I said, okay, here they are, you hang them, and I'll adjust, and they hung them, and then they said, oh, we want to leave this open right here.
Right.
It's really beautiful. It does this, it gives a little circle, and I said, that's perfect, let's go. And so, and being able to, you have to have a certain amount of control, but also being able to let people who are helping you help and do that. And I got advice and information and input from just so many people, and that was really good and really helpful. And I think that that was a very special. And so, in a way, that's part of it being a work in progress, is that I still want more information, more advice, more help. It's not just my piece at that point; it becomes a lot of people's piece. And in that sense, it is a work in progress. There's also the work in progress in terms of, I'm not sure, or I know that there are some photographs that I really wanted to include that I can't, because I couldn't take them because there's snow on the ground, or there's, it was too far away for me to go in the time frame that I had to make this. And so I feel, and then there's this whole piece about what the role of human beings is in this forest. And in the forest in general, and how do I encompass that, and how do I deal with that, and
so how do you encompass and deal with that?
That's a good. I'm still figuring that out a little bit. But at one point there were some more old photos that were of logging, and I ended up taking them out after talking to some people about it and thinking about it a while. And the photos that I left that have humans or human detritus really in them are this one of a burned car that was in the Holiday Farm Fire, and this one of a steam donkey that was just left in a clear cut. That's one of the old photos. And then there's two photos. The one over there in the corner that was taken by my great-great-uncle in the 70s actually, and there's my self-portrait over in the other corner, opposite corner that is, and I wanted to use those two photos because they mark sort of the time frame of our big climate change, and and give kind of a circle. They give a parameter of time and a circle of life. So we start from the 1870s, and the other one is from earlier this year, so 2022, and and the frame of time that I'm talking about in the work.
So where do you see this? I want to keep walking through the forest, because I'm seeing all of these really wonderful bits through and above these discoveries. So where do you see the project going next? If it is a work in progress, what happens next? There's two parts to that. One part is I want to keep working on my emulsion and trying to do some slightly different things with the emulsion so that I can make the images a little richer.
A sort of side piece of that is that at some point, you can't, as an artist, I can't just keep making without ever making any money or paying for it. And so I'm also going to be printing some of them on paper. They look really beautiful on paper, actually. And I'm going to print some of them on paper with the hope that I can, sell a few. Or maybe I'll do something where I'll ask people to sponsor a tree. Can you sponsor a tree? And so that I can, because it gets a little overwhelmingly expensive, this piece. And so that's one area where I want to work. And then this other area is I've been thinking about if I want to include other people, or I was thinking maybe as a sort of a whole side thing that wasn't on glass, but including some people in the forest. And so I was thinking about including some photos about logging, but also including some photos about firefighting and reforestation. And I'm going to give a tour to some firefighters and of the show, and so that will be really interesting. And I'm hoping that they'll then agree to let me take photos of them. And so people may come into my forest, but it'll be in that context where it's where there's a balance of time periods and a balance of things. And I think initially when I was working on the piece, I just wanted to get photos done and all the photos I liked, and there's so many more of the photos that I like. And I think one of the hard things that's going to be that is going to be for me is to limit it to 70 trees. And so maybe I'll find some other horrible factoid, like the,
I hope not.
Yeah, I know, I hope not too, but instead of having 70 trees, one for every 1,000 fires, I'll have, I was like, well, 100 and 1 million, and 10 million, that doesn't work, because 10 million acres burned last year in California. So
that mathematical equation.
Some kind of mathematical equation, because I feel like just having a little bit of mathematical equation or a little bit of data to it's kind of like a root that, that's kissing the floor. Just that much will keep keep the whole piece.
It's a way to hold it together.
Yeah.
So I'd like to just finish up over here.
Oh yeah, with the oak tree?
With this oak tree that is just...
Isn't that a beautiful tree?
Exquisite.
Oh my God,
and
it's so exquisite.
It really has been, you made this decision to set it apart.
Yeah.
Not in a small grove or in a, one of these groupings of trees. So tell us, what do you know about this tree?
Well, that tree is actually in the, I have a friend whose family lives in just out of St. Helena, and this tree is in their yard, and the deck of their house burned in the fire, and this tree came within about 30 feet of the fire. And so when I went there to collect some ash and to see how things were going, I took this photograph of the tree, because I was like, well, that tree, that's a really special, exquisite tree, So it's a live oak, and
which is native to
California, to that part of, so it's a native, and they tend to grow in a little bit more of an oak savanna, so it's a little bit more open than our dense Doug fir forests that we have here, or than the really dense redwood forests that are nearby there. But I feel like that's kind of part of, it's a type of forest in a sense, it's a type of ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely.
And that I needed to include it, and that's been a little tricky. Like, how do you include multiple ecosystems? I don't want it to be just one ecosystem. And so this tree kind of just spoke to me. And, and I actually love the way it tore, and that was completely out of my control.
And the way it blurs a little bit here, it contrasts with the crispness there.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. And thanks to all of the trees that, that are represented here.
Right.
Really that whole forest culture. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. Great, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, we have Mount Hood over in that one.
Which one is that?
In the
Oh, this one?
background,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that's Mount Hood. And
what's
that
this
is
flower?
a calochortus. It's a little bulb, and real life they're about this big, so it's 10 times its
Yeah.
real life size. But they're very special because bulbs are just really special in the forest.
I love all the height, that whole being able to really get up close.
And there's some other, this one's one of the other old ones. I want to point it out because I haven't made note of it yet. But that one's also by Carlton Watkins, and it's Multnomah Falls
It
before
looks
the
like
bridge.
Oh, okay.
And so, because it was taken in 1905, and so it's before the bridge. And none of us, there's no one alive at this point who has ever seen Multnomah Falls look like that. And so I think it's a really special photograph for that reason. And I thought it would, and it's so of the 19th century in terms of like, it's, wanting to bring everybody out to the West Coast and this expansionist viewpoint that, because of the nature being so fantastic.
Right.
And so it's really ironic that bringing all these people has also brought a lot of destruction.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
Anyway.
thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you.
It's just been so great working with you.
Likewise. It's been wonderful.
All right.
Thank you so much.